So my name's Lottie, as Chitska said, and I'm from Melbourne in Australia, and I'm affiliated with the University of Melbourne and Murdoch Children's Research Institute, and I'm a PhD candidate and speech pathologist. So this is where I'm from. This is the Murdoch Children's Research Institute, which is situated inside the Melbourne Children's Hospital, and I'm on level 5. And this project came about really because Chitska approached the head of my lab, Professor Angela Morgan, and highlighted that we didn't know much about communication in Kleefstra syndrome beyond a couple of case studies. So we really wanted to endeavour to learn more. But before I give you our preliminary findings, so we've just completed data collection for this project, I wanted to give a bit of background on speech and language and communication. So it's speech pathologists, I think, pet peeve that people use speech and language interchangeably when actually they're completely different things, although there are overlap and similarities. And it's important that we identify the difference between speech and language because an individual might have speech challenges but have no language challenges, and so this informs how we support someone. Also, speech and language are very sensitive mirrors into the neurobiology of an individual. So certain speech disorders can give us an indication of what's happening at a neurobiological level. So speech and language are mapped onto milestones or normative data. So we assess a child and we think about what is appropriate for that child's age. And for speech, we think about how many speech sounds an individual has. Are the speech sounds clear? And if there are speech differences, an individual might meet criteria for a speech disorder. And I've listed some on the slide here. The first 4, articulation disorder, phonological disorder and delay, and stuttering, are very common in the general population. But the last 2, which I'll circle back to in a little bit, childhood apraxia of speech, or CAS, which is also referred to as developmental verbal dyspraxia, and dysarthria, are motor speech disorders and are very rare in the general population. In fact, CAS affects 1 in 1,000 children on average. And then keep that in mind when I come to my results. Language, this is very, very simplified, and all of you are excellent and speak many languages, and I'm so embarrassed that I only speak English. I think I'm the only person doing my presentation in my first language, so I hope I don't stuff it up. So we think about vocabulary and grammar. So if I say, me wanted to shop, my grammar is a challenge, but I have all the vocabulary and my speech is really clear. So you can see that that's a language challenge, not a speech challenge. Like if I saw a picture of a cat and I said tat, I'm getting the speech sound wrong, my word is correct, my speech is the challenge there. And then we can also differentiate language into our ability to understand, which is receptive, and our use of language, which is expressive. So when individuals have significant speech and language impairments, they might require an alternative method of communication, which is known as AAC. And it's not a very user-friendly term, I don't think, but it's the term that we use. And AAC can be divided down into different methods. So unaided AAC does not use an external system, like sign language. And aided AAC uses an external system. And Katerina talked yesterday about assistive technology, and high-tech aided AAC is assistive technology. And there's amazing things being done, which I don't know about, so don't ask me. But at a very base level, I know there's a lot of amazing work being done in AI, for instance, in aided high-tech AAC. So that's very early days. And an individual might be a multimodal AAC user if they use a high-tech system, let's say at school, a low-tech system at swimming lessons, and they might use sign at home because their parents understand sign. So many individuals are using multiple systems and they might have a bit of speech too. So I've got 2 videos here, and these families have provided me with consent today to share these. And it's 2 AAC users. The first is using unaided AAC and the second is using aided high-tech AAC.
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Mouse.
Good. Mouse.
House.
And both these boys have Kleefstra syndrome as well. So that brings us to the study. So we aimed to recruit a cohort of individuals with Kleefstra syndrome with a range of communication abilities, ages, genotypes and language backgrounds listed on the slide here. And also just to say, that if a parent could speak the language, even if their child couldn't, we could include them because most of our data relied on caregiver reports in the form of standardised assessments and also quantitative and descriptive surveys. We also gathered clinician reports to validate caregiver report, and then English-speaking families had a Zoom call with me and I did a speech assessment with their child if their child was verbal. And we also have speech recording data, which I haven't started analysing yet, which was available in all the languages listed on the slide here. And families would do it in their own time if their child was verbal. And what's interesting is we can quantitatively assess this using acoustic analysis, so then it's an objective measure of speech, whereas of course my perceptual measurements are affected by my bias naturally as a clinical assessment, so it's nice to have that objective measure as well. So we recruited currently 102 individuals that we can include in the study from early childhood through to adulthood, and our median age was 9.5 years old. And I'll come back to that in a bit because it's quite a young cohort overall, and we had individuals from 25 different countries. And I won't go on about this too long because you guys are all across this, but just wanted to say that we did see generally reflected what we've seen in the literature or in clinical reports, which is that 50-50 split between deletions as causative for Kleefstra syndrome and point variance. And then the pink wheel on the right, you can see that there are a lot of conditions that are mirrored in the literature. I will say that that regression number of 15%, this is based on caregiver report, and we also have a very young cohort. And we know that regression is often prevalent in Kleefstra syndrome in adolescence and adulthood. So I just want to point that out there as why that might be affecting, because we're only getting that snapshot in time with a cross-sectional study. So we looked at language and genotype-phenotype correlation. And I just want to point out the other deletions category are individuals who'd had fish. So we didn't know necessarily the size or the location of their deletion. And that was often older individuals. And we can see that there are, in cognitive ability, for instance, there are certain strengths in the group, and the groups are very heterogeneous, as Dimitri said before. We are currently looking at the location of missense and frame shift variance, so I'm excited to read your paper when it comes out. And we can see that from this very rough schematic that cognitive ability is incongruent with language. So individuals might have average cognition, for example, looking at the frame shift variance in the average box, but you go across to expressive language and there are less individuals in that average box, if you like. So cognition does not equal language. That's basically my take-home message. Even though it is a fair indicator, it's not necessarily the same thing. And then we also did a caregiver assessment with individuals who were verbal, which was standardised for individuals over 4 years old. And you can see there are some individuals in the average range. But in every of these 10 areas, the average range was, so the cohort was sitting below average. And speech was the most impaired domain when compared to language domains. And when we compared speech to the other 9 domains, we saw that was statistically significantly different from 7 of the 9 domains. So language and cognition are very different, and also speech and language are very different. Speech is a significant challenge for many individuals with KS, which has been reported clinically, but it's nice to see that with an objective caregiver report measure, or fairly objective, if you like. And so this was also reflected in my assessments that I did with families. So I assessed 49 individuals, and 48 of those had speech disorders. And over half the group had dysarthria, and over half the group had CAS. Many individuals had both. And so you think it's so rare in the general population, but it's actually very common in Kleefstra syndrome. There were also a lot of individuals with co-occurring speech disorders. So if you think about the morphology of Kleefstra syndrome, there were individuals with an articulation disorder, which is a lisp. Then they also had dysarthria, and then they also had CAS. So it's quite a complex speech profile. We also consider, again, the use of AAC. An individual might be chatting away, have lots to say, but if they have a very complex speech profile, perhaps they still need an alternative system, like the boy who was signing before. He was talking and he was signing, just to support their communication. So I've got some examples of dysarthria and CAS, and I'm going to talk about them, but I'll play them first.
Do you have it done?
Yeah.
Right, darling.
So this gentleman has a motor speech disorder, dysarthria. It's neuromuscular of origin, and it disrupts lots of different speech subsystems, and we assess each of those speech subsystems. So we look at the ability to phonate with the vocal folds, respirate, so breathing, our resonance, and our articulation, for instance. Childhood apraxia of speech is also a motor speech disorder, and it's a disruption of motor planning and programming. And this little girl wanted to come to my house. Fair enough, I'm very fun, over Zoom.
Come your house.
I can't go to my house now because I'm stuck at the office.
Come your house.
So they might seem, when we're listening to them, to be quite similar, CAS and dysarthria, and there is some feature overlap. And also individuals who have both diagnoses, for example, we sometimes see with younger children, those CAS features are more marked, and then as they get older, those dysarthria features are more marked. But of course, this is just a cross-sectional study, but that's just something to note. So we looked at different reasons to communicate, and this is minimally verbal individuals. Or so individuals who might have a couple of words, but they can't rely on these for their everyday communication needs. And we looked at all the different reasons to communicate and whether an individual can do these and at what level they can do these. So an individual might sign more, lots of different ways to sign more. I've learnt over Zoom having lots of kids correct me. So they might be able to sign more, but that's their only sign. They can't sign for other communication functions. And when we looked at the group as a whole, we saw relative strengths in a child's ability to refuse. So most individuals had a symbolic way of refusing or saying no, whether that is saying no, it's very motivating, saying no, or a sign or a symbolic level of communication. But then, then the next strongest area was obtaining, so asking for something. And I think Eric said yesterday in his presentation when ChatGPT put out the little input, it said there's something about communication leading to frustration. And you can imagine if you can communicate really well for these two reasons with your sign language, if you have all this other stuff you want to say, that could be really frustrating. And so we also got caregivers through their many surveys that to complete, for which I'm so grateful, how they used AAC across time. So over half the group had used sign language at some point, and many individuals were able to use sign language to create sentences. And I even had a mum send me this lovely video of her son rapping with sign, which is really impressive. I can't do that. And then many individuals used low-tech and high-tech systems. I just also want to go back to, yes, it is less than the sign, but I'm going to go back to the age of our cohort in a second. And then a small portion used both low-tech and high-tech. About 1 in 3 to 1 in 4 individuals used an unaided system, so sign, and then an aided system, so low-tech or high-tech AAC. And again, this is not necessarily at the same time. They might have used sign and then they might have used another system when they got to school. Often hear stories, for example, of, sorry, I've got a frog in my throat, of kids who would sign at home and they go to a school that they didn't know sign language. So they'd have to learn another system. So we looked at AAC use across time. Sorry. I lost my voice on the plane earlier this week. It's not been good. So I looked at AAC use across time. We saw that lots of younger individuals were using sign and gesture in those early years. Sorry, 1 second. Thank you. It would happen now, wouldn't it? That's violent. Sorry. Thank you. We're almost at the end. I'm over my time anyway. So basically we saw that many individuals were multimodal, so using more than one method, and aided AAC use increased with age. Sorry, now it sounds like I'm crying. I'm not crying. Golly gosh, okay, I'm going to take myself outside after this. You can ask me questions later. So sign and aided AAC use also, some individuals started using it again because of regression. So we got to think about not just that early language learning period, but planning for the future. So this is what we know now about language, speech and cognition. It's heterogeneous. Receptive and expressive language aren't significantly different. I don't know if I mentioned that before. And speech disorders are really a core challenge for this group. And their language and cognition and speech are all separate. They're all different entities, even though they influence one another. And then what do we know now about AAC? And I've touched on this before, but we need to support a range of reasons to communicate. And before, when I showed that individuals have strengths in some areas, it doesn't mean that they have weaknesses in others. It just might not be a focus for therapy at that point in time. So we need to think about when we're using AAC therapies or when we're developing tools, how we can best support all these reasons to communicate. Oh no, I forgot my thank you slide. That's really important. So there's me. I get to see all the kids. That's the best part. But there are lots of other people involved. So my two supervisors, Professor Angela Morgan and Professor Ingrid Schiffer, lots of clinical geneticists from all over the world, and also, so importantly, the patient support groups. Again, it sounds like I'm crying. It's emotional that you've supported me, but it's really not that. Really, when we started the project, we didn't think that we'd get so much support and so much interest from families, which has allowed us to find out a lot more than we otherwise would. And obviously, this is just a small snapshot. We're still in the phases of investigating the data set more. Thank you.